Good evening, all. എല്ലാവർക്കും നമസ്കാരം. A very warm welcome to each one of you as gather today to mark the celebration of World Wetlands Day through our Aquatalks 15 webinar titled Wetlands Biodiversity and Human Wellbeing. It is indeed an honor and privilege to stand before you as the president of Association of Fisheries graduates and extend my hearty welcome to this elite occasion. As we embark on this journey of exploration, awareness, I am filled with gratitude of your presence, which has immense value to our collective efforts to wetland conservation. And today we have Dr. Professor Biju sir, Dean, Faculty of Science and Head Department of Aquatic Biology and Fisheries, University of Kerala, as our esteemed speaker today. His expertise in this field promises and provide us with profound insights. I'm very much happy to welcome you, sir. And wetlands play a crucial role maintaining ecological balance, supporting biodiversity. And today we are discussing wetlands, biodiversity, and human well-being together for the conservation sustainability aspect. I welcome all of you for the program today. And for today's program, Hari Pravesh, Vice President of the Association of Fisheries graduates and an ecologist, who is moderating this session. I'm handing over to Hari for taking over the further proceedings of this program. Hari, please. Over to you.
Okay. Munir, can you hear me?
Yes, Hari, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Munir. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Biju sir. Okay. So today, February 2, World Wetlands Day. Here, dear FG members and distinguished guests, good evening. It is with great pleasure that I welcome Professor Dr. Biju, an eminent scholar and a luminary in the field of marine biology and fisheries, as our distinguished speaker today. Before we proceed, let me introduce our speaker, Dr. Biju. Professor Biju currently holds the prestigious position of Head of the Department of Aquatic Biology and Fisheries and Dean of Science at the University of Kerala, where he contributed significantly to the realms of education and research and administration. So with an illustrious career spanning over around 28 years, Dr. Kumar brings a wealth of experience and expertise in his academic forefront. His academic journey includes obtaining a PhD in aquatic biology fisheries from the same university. I think it is in 1996, and MPhil from the same department. Dr. Kumar initiated his endeavors as a taxonomist, mainly in fish parasite, in fly fishes. And over the years, sir, evolved as a versatile researcher, shifting from specialized taxonomist to an ecologist, well-versed aquatic scientist, not an ecologist, aquatic scientist, exploring the diversity and distribution of aquatic organisms, ranging from small organs such as crustacean parasites to cnidarians to whales. Now is working on whales and whale acoustics. And Dr. Kumar research interest encompasses a broad spectrum, including biodiversity, documentation, taxonomy, especially in fish, crustaceans, molluscan, and cnidarians. Recently, sir conducted a international workshop on jellyfishes in the Department of Aquatic Biology. I also attended that workshop in the department. And he also working on invasion biology and conservation policies. Also, one of the member of CRZ Zone Committee of Kerala, Government of Kerala in Kerala. His commitment to fostering sustainable practices in evident his research career and research portfolio, which covers subject of taxonomy, sustainable fisheries, aquatic ecology, and education of sustainable development. He received numerous accolades and awards in his throughout his long-lasting career, including Young Scientist Award and many other good service and awards. And he also received appreciation letter from Ministry of Environmental Research, MOF, Environment Forest from Government of India for successfully implementing green crops in our schools in our state, Kerala state. In addition, Dr. Biju Kumar is a passionate public speaker and a citizen science promoter, actively engaging in young generation on issues of sustainability and biodiversity science. He collaborates with both government and non-government organizations, including our association, FG Association of Fisheries. He is a well-wisher of our association and navigating the dynamic landscape of environmental conservation with grace. His dedication to science, communication, and environmental education is further evident in his role of Chief Editor of Journal of Aquatic Biology and Fisheries, in-house journal from Kerala University. He continues to play a pivotal role in shaping and critical topics, serving organizing secretary of. He is also serving as organizing secretary of Indian Biodiversity Congress. Currently, also holding this position now. He and his team, that is very important, describe several new genera and new species, around more than 50 new species of aquatic organisms, and including 3 species has been named in recognition of his name, his contributions to this field of aquatic science or marine science, and more than 250 research papers and more than 35 books and numerous popular science articles in our magazines, daily newspapers, and many more. His body of work reflects commitment to advancing knowledge and fostering deeper understanding to our aquatic system. So it is our privilege, association privilege, to have Professor Dr. Biju Kumar here with the AFG today evening, and we eagerly anticipating his enlightening insight to share his wealth of knowledge of wetlands with us. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to our esteemed speaker. Thank you, sir. And please note that if anyone have any doubt or queries, please use the chat box. Okay. So, sir, please.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hari and Munir, for the invitation, and it's also always happy to be with the FG family, and I thank all the members for joining this talk. And happy Wetlands Day to all of you. I speak primarily for the next 45 minutes on wetlands, primarily centering my talk on how the wetlands help in development and also human well-being. And this will be the main theme of my lecture. So let me present the slides to you. I hope you can see this.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay, so the topic of my discussion will be wetlands, biodiversity, and human well-being. And this is basically the theme for World Wetlands Day, that is 2nd February 2024. And the outline of my lecture, I'll specifically speak on wetlands and how the Wetland Convention helped in organizing the activities towards wetland conservation, wetland awareness, and also initiating the talk on wetlands throughout the world. And then status of the global wetlands. Then I specifically focus my discussion, since the topic is human well-being, and what are the specific ecosystem services provided by the wetlands. And then how, when we go for conservation and restoration of the wetlands, and what is the importance of nature-based solutions, and then how wetlands are connected with the various sustainable development goals, and also understanding the connectivity between wetlands and other systems, other ecosystems, and how do we go ahead. These will be the topics which I'll generally cover in this topic. And wetlands was actually not in limelight earlier, maybe a few decades back, and it is considered as a wasteland. It is considered as a place where you find a lot of the waste materials and also mosquitoes, and also considered as a land without any kind of value. But all these have changed primarily because when in 1971, a convention was organized, and that convention is called the Convention on Wetlands of International Importance. And this convention was not organized as an ecosystem in general, but it is organized as a specific habitat for the wetland birds. So the convention, the Ramsar Convention, Ramsar is basically a place in Iran, very near to the Caspian Sea, where the first international convention was organized, primarily to highlight the importance of wetlands as the waterfowl habitat, mainly as a wetland bird habitat. And as you know, the birds use wetlands for multiple purposes, like breeding, nesting, rearing the young ones, the source of drinking water, feeding, resting, shelter, and a lot of social interactions. So throughout the world, the waterfowls use this as a primary habitat, and many of the waterfowls are critically endangered, and they have a very specific value in terms of the ecological services and in delivering the active food throughout the world. So they have an importance like that. So that is the reason why the wetlands came into limelight, primarily as a waterfowl habitat. And then, the multiple factors also contribute to the health of the wetlands, and then it became a larger a center of attraction, primarily because the wetlands provide a lot of ecosystem services. And then after 1971 conference, when large number of contracting parties joined this wetland convention, and each of the countries started identifying the wetlands of international importance. And these wetlands of international importance are identified based on a set of criteria, which is provided by the Ramsar Bureau. And this Ramsar Bureau is the organization, the apex organization, which actually forward the guidelines for the management of the wetlands, and they coordinate all the activities connected with the Ramsars, the policies, wetland policies, and they also bring out documents regarding the health of the wetlands throughout the world, etc. So these Ramsar sites are the wetlands of international importance, and identified by each of the country or the contracting party, or we can say the states which joined this convention. And they are identified based on certain criteria, and the criteria also include the number of birds visiting that, number of people use this wetland as for the livelihood, and also the fisheries potential at the rate of the site, and a series of other criteria. So based on the criteria, each of the country will identify wetlands of international importance, and they are now referred to as Ramsar sites. Okay. And the Ramsar Bureau has provided a very specific definition for the Ramsars, and okay, and then they defined wetlands as areas of marsh, fen, peatlands, or water, whether natural, permanent, or temporary, with the water that is static or flowing, fresh, brackish, or salt, including areas of marine waters, the depth of which at low tide does not exceed 6 meters. Which means, the wetland, as the name indicates, it is actually a land which is wet, but it has specific, the characteristics, and these characteristics are primarily these are the areas or the potentially inundated by surface or groundwater, and support vegetation adapted for life in saturated soil. So saturated soil is one of the major features in almost all the wetlands, and they may be there in the freshwater system, brackish water system or in the marine system where the depth of during the low tide does not exceed 6 meters. So that means it include a variety of habitats where the soil is saturated, and it may be even some of the artificial areas or man-made areas can also be considered as an artificial wetland for that matter. So this is a general definition given for the wetlands by the Ramsar Bureau. Okay. And after the convention, Ramsar Convention in 1971, throughout the world, the Wetlands Day was celebrated right from 1997. And the reason is very simple, because to create awareness throughout the world, the importance of wetlands and what is the role of the wetland and how do they support the human species, their well-being, also the other ecosystems through the connectivities, etc. And 1997 onwards, 2nd February is celebrated as World Wetland Day, and that is why today we are on this lecture. And the United Nations actually endorsed this as an international day since 2022. Okay, and before that, Ramsar was actually organizing it, and the United Nations endorsed this as an international day called World Wetland Day since 2022. Okay. And regarding the Ramsar Convention, it is the first of the modern global multilateral environmental agreements specifically pertaining to one ecosystem called the wetlands. Okay, this is basically probably the first convention, international agreement devoted to a particular ecosystem called the ecosystem. That is a wetland. No, there is no other international convention for a specific ecosystem. That is another importance of the wetland or the Ramsar Convention. And now you can see that almost 90% of the United Nations member states are signatory to including India, are signatory to this convention, and the signatories are often referred to as contracting parties. Okay, India is also a contracting party to Wetland Convention. Okay, and this year specifically, the theme every year will have a specific theme for the World Wetland Day. This year the theme is wetlands and human well-being. Okay. And that is what we are now talking in this entire lecture. And this specifies how the human well-being or human health is connected with the world's wetlands. And how they are connected? They are connected with the physical well-being, mental well-being, and the environmental well-being. And how do they connect to all of us? Okay, that is one thing. And also, throughout the history, people have a very, very strong connectivity, some kind of an organic connectivity with the wetlands. And how do the wetlands support us, mainly as human species? And how do they inspire us? And how do they help in resilience, especially to the environmental changes? And all these things contribute to the human well-being and ecosystem well-being. Okay. And also, this day specifically tells us that the protecting wetland is as important as protecting ourselves, and that is another important thing. And this is the slide which is selected from the Ramsar Bureau, and where how the wetlands are connected with the human species, and how do they help sustain life as a central to the human well-being. And there are large number of reasons, and we will discuss one by one, and how throughout the world these are the storehouses of water and food, livelihood, climate regulation, and connected with the culture, spirituality, etc. And these are the centers for the biodiversity in multiple levels, including genes, species, and ecosystems. And then coming to the status of the global wetlands. And those who have time, you can download this report, which is published in 2020. And this report is called the Global Wetland Outlook. And this is this is a showcase of the current status of the wetlands throughout the world, a compilation which came after a series of discussions and reference to a large number of papers across the world. And this Global Wetland Outlook provides some alarming statements. And the statements are primarily centered around the loss of wetlands. And globally, we lost almost 35% of the wetlands since 1970. That means in the last 4 decades, the planet lost almost 35% of the wetlands. And the disappearance of the wetlands are faster than that of the forests. Okay, throughout the world, there are a large number of discussions centered around forests, but the disappearance is much faster than that of the forests. And what are the driving forces for the wetland loss? And the primary driving force is the land use change. How do we change the landscape around the wetlands, and including the watershed areas? And this degradation of the watershed areas is the primary contributor to the wetland loss. There are other contributors also, but the primary contributor is the land use change, primarily loss of agricultural lands and the wetlands connected with that. And now there is another problem, and that is the problem faced by the problem driven by the climate change and its impact. So this is, I am not going into the details of that, and these are the some of these striking points which are mentioned in the global wetland outlook. Okay, and then also now we understand that healthy wetlands are critical to meeting sustainable development goals, which is forwarded by the United Nations to be achieved by 2030. Okay, and how do they help in attaining sustainable development goal or meeting sustainable development goals, or the so-called SDGs? One, they help in climate mitigation, adaptation, biodiversity, human health, and all these things. And all these things are much better than any other terrestrial ecosystems, the services offered. And then we will discuss the ecosystem services, but it provides the livelihood for 4 billion people globally who are actually reliant on the wetland services, a series of services, which we will discuss in the coming slides. Okay, and then how do you evaluate the, in terms of economics, the ecosystem services for human health, well-being, and security? And it is estimated to be 48.4 trillion in a year. So that is the ecosystem, the service value provided by the wetlands globally, and we will specifically discuss some of the ecosystems and their values. So which means, you know, this is one of the highest compared to any other natural ecosystem globally. Okay. And then how do what are the primary services provided by the wetlands? And you can see that it's, everybody knows that the wetlands are the kidneys of the nature, primarily because, you know, a series of pollutants which are brought by the rivers and streams, they are purified because of the very specific bacteria present in the bottom of the wetlands, and that is the reason why they are considered as the filters or the kidneys, the natural kidneys or nature's kidney, and that is one thing. And then throughout the world, the wetlands are the storehouses of water, especially during the flood. And you look at any of the Indian cities, the flood which happened in Chennai or in Tuticorin recently, or in Kerala, we can say in large number of cities, including Cochin, Thiruvananthapuram, Calicut, and all the cities are flooded during the heavy rain, primarily because we lost all the wetlands around the city, which were the storehouses of water. And that you understand, that you should understand. And also, it in many of the ecosystems, specifically the mangroves, they protect the coastal areas, and they also are the main centers of absorbing carbon dioxide, and that we will discuss later. And it's also the key habitat for the large number of aquatic organisms, particularly shrimps and fish. And you know, then the annual coastal protection provided by the coastal wetlands alone is around 23 billion US dollar annually. So that means it's actually a very, very heavy economic contribution by offering the ecosystem services. And like some of the major services are the droughts. During the droughts, these are the centers which provide the water because they absorb and store large amount of water. They absorb flood water, and they are the biodiversity hotspots, which we will discuss, and they are the natural filters, and they protect the land against erosion. So you can see these are some of the major ecosystem services. We will discuss the minor as well in the coming slides. Okay. So in the next few slides, I'll be giving you an idea about the services provided by the ecosystems. And you should understand whatever the ecosystem you are working as an aquatic ecologist. And the first thing to remember about the value of an ecosystem is calculating the services. Okay, and broadly, scientifically, we can classify the ecosystem services into 4 major categories, and one is the supporting services. And how do the ecosystem, like a wetland, they support various activities? For example, how do they support the nutrient cycling? How do they support the soil formation? And these are the basically needed for the production of all other services. For example, you look at the fertile soil, how the fertile soil help in maintaining the water purification. And for example, or the photosynthesis, which is happening there, and how the photosynthesis ultimately help in sequestering the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and how it help in resilience towards climate change. And then how do they support biodiversity so that it provide the other services like provisioning services, and also how they provide a habitat for a larger number of organisms, and thereby providing the biodiversity values. And all these things are the supporting services. Then provisioning services. Normally, we value an ecosystem by looking at only at, in most of the cases, provisioning services. What are the provisions we are going to get, like the food, the timber, and or the fresh water, or whatever may be the products which you directly derive from the wetland. Okay, and more importantly, in terms of wetland, they help in regulating many of the services. For example, the services such as purification of water, and this is actually a regulating service. And the flood control, it's a regulating service. And climate, primarily by a carbon sequestration, they help in regulating climate. Okay, not only locally but also globally. So all these things are regulating services. And cultural services, for example, what are the cultural and spiritual services provided by the wetlands? For example, the spiritual enrichment. Many of the spiritual centers are around the water bodies, as you know. Then cognitive development and reflection, recreation, aesthetic experience, and these are the areas where the researchers like us, or the students like us, basically understand the whole ecological principles. So all these things are part of the indirect services, including the cultural services. So looking at the supporting, provisioning, regulating, and the cultural services, let us now discuss how the wetlands ultimately are taking some examples. Okay. Yeah, one of the classical examples to study the wetland ecosystem services are definitely mangroves. Okay, and because this is in terms of economic value, these services provided by the mangroves will be the highest compared to any other ecosystem globally. And if you look at the supporting services, it provide, as you know, the mangroves provide the nurseries for a large number of coastal or aquatic organisms, like their life cycles maintenance, biodiversity maintenance and protection, and ecosystem process maintenance, etc. All these supporting services are provided by the mangroves. We will discuss it further. And provisioning services, you can count any number of products which you derive from the wetlands, including the possible future materials which we will discuss later, including medicine, food, fuel, wood, fiber, tannins, fodder. A series of provisions come from the mangrove ecosystem, and they help in climate regulation. They regulate the natural hazards and water quality maintenance, nutrient recycling, water cycling, soil stabilization, erosion control, and these are some of the major regulating services of a mangrove. In terms of cultural services, ecotourism, we have specific examples coming up. Okay, like recreation, aesthetics, education, scientific research, heritage and culture, spiritual enrichment, religious value. So all these things we will discuss in the coming slides as well. And Then there is another method of assessing the economic value. One, in most of the cases, unfortunately, we calculate the economic value by the use value only. For example, what are the direct uses, what are the indirect uses, but there are some of the other uses as well. For example, there is an option value. For example, if there is an ecosystem like mangrove, what will be the future value for that? That we need to consider. And what are the future possible uses? For example, some of the medicines which are coming up from the wetland or the mangroves, we don't know. For example, some of the microbes, ultimately, how do they contribute the molecules towards future research? Once we realize that, then there is actually an option value. And there is also an existing value for the future, or the so-called bequest value. And for example, the future generation, because we are enjoying the benefit, the future generation also has to have the right to enjoy all the benefits out of that. So there is actually some kind of future value. And also, like any other ecosystem, like any other human beings, these ecosystem, all the ecosystems or all the wetlands have an existence value, and that all they have the right of existence. And these are all future values, and sometimes in the direct economic evaluation, it may not come. So that means when you calculate the economic value of any ecosystem, for that matter, we need to calculate the use value as well as non-use value, which are probably the future value and the value by virtue of its existence also. So that is something which we need to understand. Okay. And for example, you take any coastal ecosystem, for example, a coastal wetland. And normally any coastal wetland, they will provide a large number of services. I'm not detailing everything. For example, they support agriculture, water filtration, the wave attenuation, cultural heritage, employment opportunities for recreation and enjoyment, and carbon storage, coastal buffering, and coastal protection. And then they provide its major, almost all the coastal wetlands are tourism centers, and these are the centers for biodiversity as well. So you understand that all these things ultimately help in maintaining the ecosystem services. So coastal ecosystem services are something to be assessed, and these are the heritage sites to be preserved for future as well. And in India, for example, there are only limited number of studies evaluating the value of an ecosystem. I am highlighting this study done by Everard et al. In 2019, looking at the wetlands of Kolkata, and these are in the Gangetic Delta, and what are the services. And they have specifically categorized each of the services provided by the Kolkata wetlands, which are part of that is in the city as well. And you can see that I am not detailing everything, the provisioning services, including large number of provisioning services, and the cultural services like educational, research, spiritual and religious value, aesthetic value, recreation, tourism, cultural heritage, and all these things are there. They have very large number of regulating services and supporting services, even though this wetland is situated within the city. So you can see that, if you similarly, even as a small project for the schools or the university departments, this can be assessed by looking at the specific services, the value of each of the wetland ecosystem. Maybe a small pond in your city, it can be specifically assessed. And if you assess that, and in terms of ecosystem services, in terms of economic value, if you assess the value, definitely this is one thing which ultimately contribute to policymakers. Because ultimately, when it comes to policymakers, when it comes to bureaucrats or the politicians, they calculate the value in terms of economic value and also the service value. And that is the reason why the biologists also should work with policies, primarily by looking at the economic values of wetlands generally. Now, through in future, these ecosystems, specifically mangroves, will have a larger role, primarily when you look at the carbon storage potential of these ecosystems. For example, there is a term called blue carbon. Blue carbon is basically the carbon which is stored in the coastal and marine ecosystems. And there are 3 ecosystems which are very important, even though other ecosystems may also do the same thing. But in terms of potential, 3 ecosystems are very, very important. And one definitely are mangroves, and second, tidal marshes, and third, the seagrasses. In terms of India, we have these two ecosystems are very important as a blue carbon ecosystem. One is a mangrove and there is a seagrass. Okay, and let us see how do they do that. And you know that all these plants through photosynthesis, they absorb carbon dioxide, and this carbon dioxide ultimately is converted into large number of organic molecules, which ultimately help in making the body of these organisms. And that means some part of this carbon dioxide is converted into the body building molecules and ultimately stored in the body. And then part of that ultimately gets released into the through the roots into the soil. Okay, and in coastal ecosystem, that is very, very important. You should understand this carbon once enter into the soil. Normally, the coastal ecosystem, the soil may get accumulated with all these leaves and other organic materials, and the oxygen content in the soil is very, very less compared to a forest or a terrestrial ecosystem. So that means the carbon breakdown will be very, very slow from the plant materials, the organic matter. And that is the reason why the coastal ecosystems are so important, because they have an anaerobic situation. The carbon degradation process from the organic molecules in the system is very, very slow, which means essentially the soil store carbon dioxide for a longer duration compared to the terrestrial ecosystem. Okay, and part of the carbon dioxide may go out. And this is the value of the coastal ecosystem in terms of carbon storage, or storing the blue carbon, the so-called blue carbon, or the carbon stored in the ecosystems. And they have a future value primarily because when we have a climate agreement, and the countries which have larger the forest cover or coastal ecosystem cover, or the blue ecosystems, or the blue carbon potential storage potential, they can get more carbon credit, so that we can use this credit for other developmental, economic developmental activities once we have a larger blue carbon ecosystem with us. So that means in carbon trading for future also, they have a very, very important role. And then compared to a terrestrial ecosystem, they have the major difference in the coastal ecosystem is that the carbon dioxide, especially with the mangroves, part of the carbon dioxide, or a major part of the carbon dioxide, is released back to the soil, where it can be stored. Because of the anaerobic scenario, it can be stored for a longer period of time. And that is how the blue carbon ecosystem, specifically mangroves and seagrasses, they can be of future value in storing carbon dioxide, thereby storing extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and ultimately help the mitigating climate change to some extent. And that is the ecosystem value is much higher than the terrestrial ecosystem. And the terrestrial ecosystem, as you can see, there is no discharge of carbon dioxide into the soil, because their root system is only on the surface, whereas the root system and the soil is aerobic, and that means any carbon which is there, it's immediately released back into the atmosphere. So whereas in the case of the coastal blue carbon ecosystem like mangroves, most of the carbon is stored below ground. That means it may remain there for a longer period of time. They will help in carbon mitigation. So that's the importance of the blue carbon ecosystems there. And remember, there is another ecosystem like the sea grass ecosystem and the coral ecosystems. And once these ecosystems are healthy, the mangrove ecosystems are healthy, and then the extra nutrients are finally supplied into the other ecosystems as well. So that is how the connectivity works. I'm not going into the details, but mangroves are linked to the adjacent ecosystem through physical, biochemical, as well as biological interactions. And these interactions facilitate the presence of health of this associated ecosystem. That means the presence of mangroves or any other as a coastal ecosystems are very, very important in maintaining the health of the other ecosystems in the shallow waters, like the seagrass ecosystem as well as coral reef. That means any kind of changes which you impart on the mangrove ecosystem will ultimately impact the other ecosystems as well. That is how the connectivity works. You take, for example, the case of Kerala and the cover of the mangrove ecosystem, and there is only one former estimate of 70,000 hectares of mangroves in Kerala. Traditionally, Kerala is actually not an ideal ecosystem for the growth of a abundant, luxuriant mangrove forest. There are some ecological reasons for that. But yet, the French team investigated in the mangrove cover maybe around 6 decades back, and they provide a value of 70,000 hectares. But there may be suspicion on this number, but yet the current value may be of the extent of the mangrove forest in Kerala may be around 4,000 hectares, maybe still less than that. And also we have lost almost all the good mangrove forests in the southern districts like Thiruvananthapuram and Kollam. Kollam, we have a small bit of forest left in near the city. And the healthy wetlands, mangrove wetlands are there only in the northern part of Kerala. And that is the current scenario. And when we look at the coastal protection, each of these ecosystem is very, very important. And in all the restoration processes, now there is a specific thrust on nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions means we have to have more and more natural kind of restoration activities rather than going for any kind of hard armoring structures or artificial structures. We'll discuss that later. Okay, this is a typical example. In all the kind of future ecosystem restoration activities, the thrust is given to the nature-based solutions. For example, if there is a mangrove, and what you can do to protect the coastal areas or restore the coastal areas. And one of the thing definitely is mangrove afforestation. But remember, mangroves, you cannot plant mangroves throughout the coastline of Kerala, for example, because if there is only sand, they will not grow. Normally, they will grow in the areas near the river mouth, and where there is more and more silt in the soil, and there is also the flooding of the coastal waters, and only in those areas the mangroves will grow. And as a next line of defense, we can even go for the coastal vegetation. And then remember, if you really go for coastal protection activity or coastal bioshield, in areas where there are no mangroves, you go for the natural plants which grow in the coastal areas. For example, if you look at some of the natural plants, and for that, there is no universal rule. You look at the traditionally the plants which are traditionally growing in a specific area, then select that. For example, a plant which is growing in the Kerala may not be suitable for Tamil Nadu, and that means you have to select the coastal plants which are locally available and then go for that. And in some of the countries, they also make another line of defense for protecting the coastal area from the action of this heavy wind and storm, and then they provide oil shelter or granite rock so that the wave energy can be dissipated. And in many areas in India, there are many trials with the geotubes and other activities and coastal bioshield by selecting natural vegetation. And that is also possible. That means all this kind of this phenomena in Western world is often referred to as living shore. That means you provide not artificial structures, but living structures in order to protect the coastal area from the wind action or the wave action. Okay, so that is that concept is called living shore, and that concept is now more and more popular because this is less expensive than any kind of hard armoring structures. But I am sure it is not possible in areas like Chelanam where the impact is so severe. But you have to go, but other areas are there which are ideal, and then you can go for the whole concept of living shore where nature-based solutions are offered as one of the solutions for the climate adaptation as well. And you also have to remember that 2021-2030 is the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. So gone are the days when we speak about the issues of the ecosystem, but now this is a time where we have to go for ecosystem restoration or restoring the ecosystem from degradation and other anthropogenic impacts. So that is the reason why all the discussions throughout the world, all the conservation discussions throughout the world are now focusing on restoring the ecosystem rather than studying more and more about that. But study and baseline data is essential. But we are now at a critical point, or the so-called tipping point, where we need to store our, we have to actually play a role significantly in restoring the ecosystem. So that is the reason why this decade is UN Decade of UN Ecosystem Restoration, and a lot of activities are happening throughout the world on this. Okay. And in terms of the mangroves, India has a very specific example. How do you engage people in mangrove afforestation? The local communities, and it is not specifically the duty of the scientific community or research community. We have to provide them with the data, we need to provide them with all the other necessary inputs on that. And we need to provide them with the action plans and strategies, but in these activities. And how do they do that? You involve local communities or the citizen scientists or the coastal NGOs or the civil society, and go for a co-management concept. Co-management concept, early, this is a recent concept which was successfully implemented throughout the world. Co-management means it's not the government's duty to manage or conserve an ecosystem. You go with the people, they are part of management, and this is called co-management. They are it's actually a cooperative endeavor with the government system and the non-governmental system, and involving the local community. So that's a co-management system. And then they are also now guiding tourists as the tourists. And then they are also now guiding tourists as the tourist guide, and taking the tourists into the natural ecosystem, and they also get more livelihood opportunities through this activity. That means there are options even in India. There are classical examples where people are involved in conservation, and the conservation of wetlands ultimately helped in improving the livelihood of the local people, and then it's a decent job for them. That means we are contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals as well, indirectly in that sense. Okay. And there is some other concept in the recent past. This is called pluralistic valuation. I'm not going into the details, but remember, pluralistic valuation is actually integrated valuation. Integrated valuation means you evaluate the potential of an ecosystem by looking at all the possible values. Okay, and that means how all these ecosystems are connected with the multiple departments and the ecosystem services, and how ultimately the whole process of documentation help in the increasing the natural capital, and also in increasing the value of the ecosystem. Okay, and that means any ecosystem, you evaluate them with taking into account all the possible components in that, all the possible values. Okay, not only the services which we have discussed in the earlier slides, but comprehensively using all the modern technologies like the GIS or all the artificial intelligence tool, all the metadata analysis. All these things should ultimately go into a decision making in evaluating the health of the ecosystem, services of the ecosystem, economic value of the ecosystem. And this philosophy is called pluralistic valuation, which means you take into account all the possible values of the ecosystem, and also a holistic assessment through an integrated valuation. Oh, that is the future, especially when you evaluate the value of an ecosystem. Okay. Okay, in the next part of next segment of my lecture, I'll specifically focus on how the ecosystem values are connected with the Sustainable Development Goals, various Sustainable Development Goals. And for example, inland fishery. Most of you are connected with the fisheries sector. So let us discuss how the inland fisheries services are connected with the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, and there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, starting with no poverty and zero hunger to international collaborations and partnerships. Okay, and how do they are connected? And if you look at some of the Sustainable Development Goals and inland fisheries, and it is connected immediately to some of the goals. Indirectly, it is connected with the multiple things, as you see in this diagram. And what are the direct connectivity? Zero hunger or no poverty. And because fish is a major source of nutrition and throughout the world, and then it's connected with the nutritional security of large number of people across the world, especially women, and then it is a direct connectivity. Clean water and sanitation, and you know that the wetlands specifically are the storehouses of the water. They filter it, and they are the kidneys of the nature. So it is connected with the SDG 6, or we can say clean water and sanitation. Okay, and then if you look at the SDG number 12, responsible consumption and production, and managing a fishery is basically connected with the responsible consumption and preventing over harvesting, and responsible consumption also reduces pressure on the fishery wealth. And then life on water is direct connectivity, life below water 14, and 15 is life on land. And that is also connected with the wetlands, because wetlands are primarily inland ecosystem and is connected with inland fisheries also. So you can see that in general, out of these 17 sustainable development goals, or the development goals set for the future development, and you can see many of these the components, many of these goals are connected with the inland ecosystem, inland fisheries in general. Okay. And if you look at, I'm not detailing it, you don't worry about this slide, but you look at the connectivities. And all the 17 sustainable development goals are connected with the directly or indirectly with the wetlands. And if you wanted to know further, there is a document called Ramsar Convention's 4th Strategic Plan, where these things are detailed. I'm not going into the details, but if you look at right from number 1 to number 17, and you can see that the connectivity is there. For example, if you look at Sustainable Development number 17, partnerships for the goals. For example, Ramsar Convention itself is a classical example of partnership between the nations, and mainly to protect the wetlands of international importance. So you can see that it's connected with every sustainable development goal, either directly or indirectly. And if you look at specifically, take some of the services and how it is connected with the different targets of sustainable development goal. For example, positive water regulation. And I told you that these wetlands ultimately help in regulating the water, especially during the flood time. Okay. And how do they regulate, and how do it remain connected with other targets like clean water and sanitation, good health and well-being, zero hunger, no poverty, life on land, life below water, climate action. So you can see that even a single target, single service provided by the wetland is connected with the multiple sustainable development targets. Okay, and you look at another target like climate regulation. Even climate regulation is connected to multiple sustainable development goals, where wetland is the center of attraction here. And then you look at the water purification interaction, and this is also connected with the multiple sustainable development goals. So that means as an ecosystem, wetlands are connected directly with the development, which means ultimately connected with the human well-being, directly or indirectly. Okay. And in India, and some of the youngsters can take it as even as a PhD topic, and inland fisheries and aquatic ecosystem. How do they connect? They are connected with the various. They need some of the outputs, not a simple research where you document biodiversity or describe a species. It is not important for the development of the Kerala state. And what the state look from the researchers, fresh researchers, fisheries graduates is, what is the benefit of the state if you do a research? And especially youngsters, when you take up a research project for future, and you have to actually deviate from the basic classical or basic studies to some of the studies with an applied value. When you select a topic, see that how it ultimately helped the government in at least taking some of the policy decisions and improving some of the changes, or in the livelihood of the people, or the economic benefit of the state, etc., etc. Okay, and if you look at the fisheries also, it is inland fisheries. You can see that the inland fisheries are again major part of the sustainable development program. And then if you are asked in an interview, what is actually the role of the inland fisheries or fishery sector for ultimately for development, you can narrate every such relationship in fisheries with the development of the state in general. Okay. And then there are a large number of very interesting studies, how the inland fishery services are connected with sustainable development goals. You look at recreation, for example, and how many places globally where fisheries provide recreation for the people. Okay. I will look at Kaveri, where the Masir fishery is involved. It's actually a tourism center for recreation. And it provides food and nutrition for a large number of people. It provides livelihood for a large number of people and income and education. All the researchers use the services provided by the wetlands in their researches, cultural services, ecosystem function and biodiversity, regulating services. You can see that the human well-being and the inland fisheries are connected to large number of sustainable development goals. And the systems and the fishery services are also connected with the large number of services. So you can see that this dendrogram provides you with a large number of clustering. And we should understand how the inland fisheries is important in a global context, especially when we think or connect development and inland fisheries sector. So it's connected. It's connected with than any other sector for that matter. So that means we should be proud to say that the fisheries sector is very, very important, a sector which ultimately contribute to the sustainable development as well in a larger manner. And then those who wanted to know, there are some very, very good publications recently on the ecosystem services generated by the freshwater fishes. Okay, and some of them probably you may not understand in a general reading, but if you go close by, for example, regulation, many of the fishes help in seed dispersal, and herbivory help in maintaining the herbivory of the fish help in maintaining the growth of the plants directly or indirectly. They help in pest control. All these things are regulating services, which are not often discussed. And then many of them are ecosystem engineers, like the benthic fishes or the loaches. Okay, and then large number of traditional knowledge systems are associated with fish and fisheries and the recreational fishery, ecotourism, or the Kerala government has already started aquatourism, where you can stay in an aquaculture farm, then go for fishing, and you can be part of the fishing exercise. All these things ultimately promote the aquatourism also. So you can see that even freshwater fishes contribute significantly to the whole process of the ecosystem services. Okay, and also as researchers or as ecologists, you should also understand, even though I'm not discussing it at length, understand the connectivities. For example, you take any river starting from the Western Ghats, for that matter. And remember, you right from the the highest peak where the first order streams begins, and when it comes down, this first order and second order streams join, and you can see the development of a third order stream, and you can see 2 second order streams joining and forming a third order stream. And when we, including aquatic ecologists, see a river only when it reaches the midland or the coastal plain. But during its course, in the entire course, a large number of wetlands are developed, large number of floodplains are developed, and each of them has a connectivity and ultimate role. And one basic environmental education paradigm is understanding the connectivity between ecosystems. That means the health of the coastal ecosystem is in turn connected with the health of the rivers and streams upstream as well. And then you can see that a series of wetlands are formed along the course of a river in a larger river ecosystem. You can see that large number of small ecosystems are formed mainly in connection with the river. That means all the health of all these wetland ecosystems are connected with the health of the larger ecosystem called the river. And in turn, the health of the coastal ecosystem also is connected with the health of the riverine ecosystem. So these kind of connectivities are very, very important in ecology. Unfortunately, many of our ecological discussions, including aquatic ecology textbooks, this is not discussed in detail. Okay. For example, you study about the river and the water flow. But when we consider only the water flow, which is the surface water in the surface, which we call it a river. But remember, as an ecologist, there is something called an invisible river, because most of the rivers are not the river which is flowing along the surface or the superficial water, but there is actually the water will percolate down, and there is actually a column of water which is moving below the ground, and this is often called the invisible river. And it is there the river which is flowing through the sand and the gravel, and that and many of the organic matter and the life in the river bottom is associated with the invisible river, or the river which is below the soil. And that means that also you should understand. And also understand a concept called the river continuum. And river continuum means right from the beginning of the river till it reaches the ocean, each of the habitat, the contribution of energy and the contribution of the organic matter comes from the top, through the activity of large number of the living organisms and the ecosystems therein. And this is one thing which you need to understand, especially when you look at the river continuum concept. So you can see that in each of the habitat, it is actually a niche for a series of organisms, including the water flowing above and the water flowing below. So you need to understand this kind of the role of a river floodplain, many of the river floodplains are also wetlands, and that connectivity and how do the regional, the ecological nexus act between these ecosystems are also very, very important. That means when you understand a river or a wetland, you understand it holistically. That is why I said the pluralistic evaluation, and that is very, very important for future as well. Okay, and that is a reason why the river should be considered as the river continuum concept should be studied in detail, because the energy and matter flow in a river ultimately starts right from the first order stream, and this matter and energy flows down, and it contributes to each and every sector of life in below the floodplain, and when it reaches the sea. Okay, and there are a large number of interesting studies how the particulate organic matter and how the microorganisms also contribute to the nutrient recycling and also to the river continuum concept. Very, very interesting studies. Okay, and this is how a wetland also functions, and you can see that when a first order stream comes at the top of the mountain, and when it reaches the wetland, and then the energy dissipates, and then it also support the groundwater flow, and then it provide habitat for a large number of organisms. And when the water also joins with the here it is purified, the water is purified, and the purified water moves down and into the main stream of the main channel of the river. And what we don't understand is actually the role played by the microbes in the system, especially for water purification. Okay, and we don't discuss it at length. And also, you remember how a Western Ghat River is connected with the ocean, and you know that the Western Ghat rivers basically originate from the ocean, primarily through the water vapor, and it is stopped. The water vapor is stopped by the Western Ghat mountains and the mountainous ecosystems, especially the forests there. They are the storehouse, and the wetlands are the storehouses of water. And this kind of connectivity is very, very important. And also, we never understand the connectivity between the river ecosystem, wetland ecosystem, and the coastal ecosystem. For example, mud banks and upwelling. And we studied about we know about mud banks. These are the highly protective areas in the coastal area, coastal belts, especially in Kerala. Okay, we call it the Chagara, and part of this material, organic material, which help in the formation of mud bank, comes from the rivers. And that means healthy rivers also contribute partially to the development of mud banks, directly or indirectly. And also recently, throughout India, there is a major issue, especially because of climate change and the rough weather and high waves. All these things contribute to the instability of the coastal areas. And you should understand the stability of the beach is partially provided by the sand which is carried by the river also. That means even a beach formation is indirectly connected with the sand and the organic material which is carried by the river into the stream, into the coastal front. And definitely a construction of a dam or any kind of diversions in the river will reduce the flow of the sand materials here. That means each of the ecosystem are connected, and this connectivity is very, very important in ecology and also in understanding in a holistic manner. And that is the reason why when we lose the sand in the coastal area, and then there is also promoted by the excavation of the sand in whatever may be the name, the stability of the beach will go, and stability and health of the ecosystem will ultimately disappear. And that is the importance of this kind of a connectivity. And some of the recent changes in Kerala as a result of the ecosystem changes are seen in the Munro Island, for example, in Kollam. I will not say that Munro Island, the sinking of the Munro Island is partially contributed by climate change. It may not be the reason, but we need to study the actual reason. And one of the reasons is that the entire Munro Island is not a geological formation. It is partially the human activity also, because when there was a Nindagara harbor and all the dredged out mud was actually deposited, and ultimately the Munro Island was formed. And there people started living, and people started constructing houses in a highly unstable land. So that means as a scientist, we should know or we should more and more make an in-depth study what is happening there, rather than making a blind statement about the ecological changes. That means we need a stronger science to answer all these questions. Okay. And the last part of my lecture, how the biodiversity will contribute to the sustainable development and sustainable utilization and the conservation. And this is possible only through the knowledge acquired through research and education. And that is the reason why this seminar is also important, especially large number of researchers, and ultimately how the knowledge created through the scientific research ultimately help in conserving biodiversity and its sustainable use, and ultimately and also conservation. And let us see some of the examples. And one of the area where probably we can have more in-depth study looking at specific ecosystem is how wetlands contribute to the health of the ecosystem and the health of the human beings. Okay. And for example, positive health benefits from watching birds and animals. And we cannot actually put value on that, but it has a value because it provides satisfaction, relaxation for a large number of people. So that's a value because it provides the mental health. It actually improves the mental health of a larger number of people, in addition to all the other, the benefits in terms of scientific research, education value, research value, etc. Okay. And also the good respiratory health correlated with the landscape and biodiversity. And we in India have the most polluted rivers, the most polluted cities, and we have one of the few of the world's best wetlands also. So they provide better respiratory health, and then in terms of the health of the people, etc., etc. Then there is an argument: wetlands are bad. The mud in the wetland is bad for your health, and there are very interesting examples, many examples, including in the studies done in with the children in Finland. That means whether wetlands will deteriorate your health or positively contribute to your health. If the wetland is healthy, if you play in the wetland, if you have the microbes in your body, it ultimately provides immunity to your body. And this is an argument in the recent past. For example, as long as you are exposed to the natural scenarios, you will become more and more resilient to the system. For example, if you are playing in a mudland, and when you go to a school, the children are allowed to play in a healthy playground, and then there are dust in the body, then they are exposed to the microbes. That means they will be more and more immune to the system. That means the so-called self in the body will be more and more active. And then they fight against any kind, because they have a defense system. And many of the students are allergic to many of the natural materials, primarily because they are not exposed. They are not exposed to these, also contribute to the gut contents and gut microflora. And that means contact with the natural ecosystem is very, very important. And there is something called hygiene hypothesis. And then if your body is exposed to all these materials, and then you will become more and more immune to the microbes and other organisms. But we need a lot of research on that. For example, those who are working with microbiology can always do a lot of research primarily in understanding what is the role of the microbes in a wetland, because they have multiple roles, and the number of microbial species in the system may be entirely different because we have an anaerobic situation there. And what is their role? How many useful molecules will come from that? And how do they contribute to the probiotic research? And all these things are very, very important, where there's a lack of knowledge as far as India is concerned. Okay. And then the value in terms of relaxation, in terms of the aesthetic services, and all these things are very, very important and better realized in these days. And there is an interesting study, probably you can look into that, the details, how the grassland ecosystem will help in reducing the amount of harmful bacteria. How do they process the bacteria, and how do they trap the bacteria, and ultimately help in reducing the coral diseases. And in areas where there are lesser amount of seagrasses, the coral diseases are more. That means many of the pathogens are screened by the grassland ecosystems. So these kind of studies are very, very important. They have a value. Okay, especially in realizing, rather than saying that they have a lot of potential, wetlands have, but you have a classical example through a research in this sense. Okay. And those who work with the fishery scientists, I always request many of the younger researchers who wanted to take up research as a career or do a PhD work, then we are living in the world of data. Okay, what we need is data. And with a large number of data, you always choose the analysis with a huge amount of data, the so-called metadata. Because we are living in the world of metadata, so that means for protection of a particular ecosystem, what we need is an entire data available or connected with that data with an ecosystem, and accumulate all the data, use all the modern tools, including artificial intelligence tools, and come up with the better models. So that means you need to collaborate. Now, one of the fishery handicap probably of many of the biology researchers is that they have no conversions with the statistical tools or the data. You always have to collaborate with the people who are good in modeling and come out with some very, very good models so that using the metadata, so that it will be of lot of applied value for future research also. Okay, so that means we need lot of data, especially for deciding upon a policy of inland fisheries, a policy of wetland conservation. We need data, and that is why you have to work, not simply collecting some of the preliminary data, but work on the data which is already available with a large number of analytical tools. That is very, very important. Because especially when you look at the value evaluation or the socio-economic importance, and now I am sure that many of you are not going to get a PhD fellowship in future, especially through larger, good quality funding support, unless and until it has a socio-economic value. Okay, that means for simple biodiversity research or simple taxonomy research or simple basic research, there will be dearth of funds for future. So that means you have to make use of all these possibilities, working multidisciplinary, and then only the funding possibilities will come. Okay, and there are a large number of questions also. For example, whether the reservoirs, stocking fish in the reservoir is good. Every fishery student will study that ranging is good for the betterment of the fisheries production. And what is the data? Is there any data? This is a very recent paper by Nachiket, and where he has specifically worked on the stocking of fishes in a reservoir and whether it is positively contributing or negatively contributing to the fisheries production ultimately. We need data. There will always the fishery people or the fishery scientists always argue that ranging is good, but we need to have data to showcase that whether the stocking will impact the inland natural fisheries there. This kind of data is required. Once you have a data, then we can support this argument. So that means for everything we need a kind of strong consolidated data, including invasive species, its potential, how do they impact the species. For all these things, for example, fish migration or fish festivals, ultimately whether it is sustainable or not. Even though it's a custom, if it is the custom will ultimately destroy the biodiversity, you have to argue with the data that if you are going for any kind of festival to harvest fish or harvest fish during its breeding migration, if it is dangerous, you need to provide the scientific truth on that. So that means there are a large number of areas where the young people can work and provide data so that it ultimately helps the state to tide over all these things. And finally, we need a kind of ecosystem approach. You cannot do compartmentalized research in future. Primarily, if you wanted to protect a wetland, the approach should be ecosystem. You don't look at the one or two species there. But if you look at an ecosystem, if you have an ecosystem approach by compiling all the data, and definitely that will have a larger implication in conservation of individual species and also maintaining the ecosystem services of that particular wetland. Okay. So if you look at some of the summary recommendations in protecting biodiversity and inland fisheries, you can see that what are the requirements, immediate requirements, and I'll stop with that. And one, improve the assessment of biological production to enable science-based management. If you have a wetland, you critically assess what is actually the productivity, what are the ecosystem services, and what is a stock. Stock means if a scientific publication will not do, but a scientific assessment with the people's participation will be much valued. Okay, and then correctly value inland aquatic ecosystems. You should understand the value. Then only you can impress the policymakers, bureaucrats on the need for conservation. Okay, then promote the nutritional value of inland fisheries, because many of the fishes which are the basically small fishes discarded. The bycatch issue we discuss in the marine ecosystem, but it's a prominent issue in the inland fisheries also. How do you use these smaller fishes? They have a nutritional value. primarily because smaller fishes we eat in toto. That means all the calcium deposits there are directly benefiting the human nutrition. So we need to promote the nutritional value of inland fisheries, especially for the nutritional security, and develop and improve science-based approaches to fishery management. So you even through a PhD work, you can forward a science-based approach for fishery management, which is not happening in many of the, unfortunately, in ecological research. It comes with some ecological water quality analysis. That's all. That is not the requirement in the modern science. We need to give ideas for management, particularly for fisheries management, and then improve communication among freshwater users. And it is very important. Who are all the stakeholders, beneficiaries? You improve communication between them and collect data, how each and every stakeholder gets benefit out of the ecosystem, etc., etc. Okay. Then improve governance, especially shared water bodies. That's something, again, larger scale. I'm not discussing that. And respect equity and rights of every stakeholder, because every fisherman, every person who draw water from the wetland, they're all the stakeholders. They have also the rights, rather than allocating a wetland for a software park. For example, it happened many times in Kerala, including in Cochin. Okay, and then make aquaculture an important ally, because the natural ecosystem, I am sure, with the current population growth, is not going to support the fisheries. So you look at all the possibilities of aquaculture, so that the inland aquatic ecosystems are a bit freed, or there will be lesser pressure, fishing pressure on the inland ecosystem. Okay, that is also a parallel part. And develop an action plan for sustainable management of wetlands in India, and specifically for each and every wetland, because the scenario, the environmental settings are all different for different wetlands. So that means for every ecosystem, even though we have an overarching policy, but we can have a management plan for each and every wetland for that matter. And these are, just for your reference, some of the classical strategies forwarded in the Ramsar strategic plan for the conservation of wetlands. One, addressing the drivers of wetland loss and degradation. To identify for each wetland what are the drivers for the loss or degradation, and then go for the corrective measures. Okay, and second, effectively conserving and managing the Ramsar site network, wisely using all the wetlands, and enhancing implementation. Because gone are the days when we discuss only, but go for restoration, go for implementation with the proper strategies. Okay, so in a mitigation strategy, priority should be avoid any kind of construction activity, development activities right in the wetland areas. But unfortunately, that's not happening. Even now, many of the wetlands are considered as a site for development. Okay, the landscape development or the development of the urban area, etc. That you should avoid. And then we have to minimize the pressure on the wetlands in some way or other. Okay, and then you have to compensate, because already we have destroyed a major chunk of the wetlands, and then definitely we need to go for restoration. Wherever possible, restoring the ecosystem should be a priority. And if it is not happening, then what will you do? Offsets. Offsets means you create another ecosystem which is actually which simulate a wetland. For example, in the floodplain management, river restoration, that is done in many countries successfully, including in Netherlands and Japan, where if in the absence of a natural wetland, they have created a series of artificial wetlands along the floodplains, so that it's an offset. Okay, and so that we have even though the main system is lost, we have another system to compensate that. So that these are the future conservation strategies. And fortunately, in India, there are few optimistic news coming up. And one, we have some very good interventions happening in some of the ecosystems. And typical example, you can study, you can learn the Chilka story. Chilka was under severe ecological destruction, but through last few years, considerable scientific interventions helped regaining the health of the ecosystem in an impressive manner in Chilka Lake. One of the classical examples. So it's such activities are happening in many of the other ecosystems. This is a positive sign, but that doesn't mean that situation is good in every wetland. This year, yesterday, the government of India has included 5 more wetlands in the Ramsar sites. Now, the total toll of wetlands as Ramsar sites in India is 80. Okay, yesterday 5 more wetlands are added. added, like the one bird sanctuary called Karevati in Tamil Nadu and in Karnataka, and that means 3 in Karnataka and 2 in Tamil Nadu. They were added to the Ramsar sites yesterday, making the total number of Ramsar sites in India as 80. So these are the positive signs. And in Kerala also, the wetland authority is trying to enlist some more wetlands into the Ramsar site so that they will get more prominence in conservation activities. That's happening now. And before I conclude, let me tell you that wetlands are the heart of solving the biggest global challenge of our time. What is that? Water and biodiversity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you for delivering a valuable and a insightful presentation on wetlands and their significance in human beings and their other aspects. So, thank you once again. Now, the forum is open for questions. There are 1 or 2 questions in our chat box. I can read. And before that, I have one announcement. Dear participants, we initially communicated that the presentation would be in Malayalam, but however, due to some request for participation from outside Kerala, we shifted the language to English. So thank you for your understanding, and please feel free to ask questions in Malayalam, both in Malayalam or English. So don't hesitate to ask questions or post questions in our chat box. Sir, on 1 or 2 questions in our chat box, I will read it. Sir, one question is there any possibility for planting seagrass in Kerala coast, like coral restorations occur in different parts of the world? Is asked by Hasina. And sir, can you?
That is the first question regarding seagrass. Okay. First of all, in Kerala coast, as far as my knowledge goes, the seagrass beds or the seagrass basically are reported only from some of the estuarine areas. Okay. And they're including Ashtamudi Lake, but the species is different, but it is a seagrass. Restoration is possible. Just like coral restoration, there are scientific restoration process for seagrass, and it's happening in many parts of the world. It is scientifically, technically, it is possible. Okay, that is one thing. And it can happen for the time being, as far as Kerala is concerned, it can happen in some of the estuarine areas, some of the brackish water lakes like Ashtamudi, where seagrasses have been recorded. It is possible. But unfortunately, in the recent past, there are no records of larger tracts of seagrasses. But wherever it is lost, it can be possible by proper surveying, technically it is possible. Second, is there any seagrass bed along the coastal areas of Kerala? There are no recent report. There are no recent report, and there are possibilities because we have seen in some of the areas seagrasses in the fishing or even the shore scene operations. And we have in our recent study, we have started looking into the presence of the seagrasses in some of the areas. We have not yet been successful. It may be present. Okay, but there is no documentation of the seagrass beds, larger tracts of beds along the shallow waters of Kerala coast. We have reports only in the estuarine area. This is answer to that question. So technically, this is possible. Okay.
Okay, sir. Sir, ചില ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ പോപ്പ് ചെയ്തു വരുന്നുണ്ട്, പക്ഷേ അത് കാണുന്നില്ല. That is regarding blue carbon. Can you shed some light on blue carbon? That is the question, but it pop-ups, but don't see it in your chat box.
Okay. I just saw that. Blue carbon is, I told you, blue means it is connected with the ocean. Okay, here the blue carbon is the carbon which is stored in the coastal ecosystems. And the carbon can be stored in any ecosystem where there is plant. It's a matter of common sense. But blue carbon ecosystem is something different, primarily because, the carbon storage potential of an ecosystem is determined based on 2 things. One, how much amount of carbon is stored in the plant. You know that during photosynthesis, every plant is capable of producing the living molecules, like the bodybuilding molecules, and that's how it is stored in the body. Okay, but when you have, but in the case of a terrestrial plant, there is no some of the carbon dioxide may also get into the soil, but in soil is aerobic. That means all the carbon dioxide which enters into the soil may immediately move out. Okay. In the case of a coastal ecosystem, the advantage is that, like a mangrove or a seagrass, the bottom is normally anaerobic, because this huge accumulation of organic matter, there is lesser amount of oxygen, only anaerobic bacteria will be there, and the system is anaerobic. That means every carbon molecule entering into the system in the soil will remain there for a longer period of time. That means in terms of carbon trapping potential, the so-called carbon sequestration, this coastal ecosystem has a tremendous role compared to a terrestrial ecosystem. And that is the reason why globally there is a drive towards protecting the coastal ecosystem or the blue carbon ecosystem, like salt marshes, mangroves, and the seagrasses. Even the algae, the seaweeds can store carbon, but seaweeds are, as you know, are sedentary. It may remain attached with some other system like rocks, and that means the potential is less compared to the seagrasses. So seagrasses, since they are growing in the shallow waters, and then they also liberate it into the carbon dioxide into the soil, the potential is very, very much. And they are also in future, we can use this for mitigating climate change, and also in the carbon trading mechanism, so that these ecosystems will have a larger futuristic value. So we can assess. Now, in many of the, including KUSAT, there are some studies where the mangrove, the carbon storage potential of this blue carbon ecosystem is estimated. And if you estimate the blue carbon sequestration potential of ecosystem, we can very well calculate the value, the carbon storage value. And based on that, we can make predictions of a larger ecosystem and its total blue carbon value. And then we can even go for afforestation, restoration, etc., which finally improve the carbon storage potential. So the blue carbon initiative is a global initiative now, where they use analyze the value of these blue carbon ecosystem in carbon sequestration and climate change mitigation. So it has a futuristic value as well for research as well. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, sir. The previous question was asked by Bisma Gulsar. And then we have a follow-up question for our seagrass, previous seagrass question. In last, the question is again asked by Hasina. In last year, seagrasses were beach casted in Trivandrum near Kollam beaches.
Yeah.
So, is there any possibility of its presence in nearby areas?
It may be possible, Hasina. It may be possible. Also a possibility, because we have examined the seagrasses which are deposited in Kovalam. There are two species which are very common in the Tamil Nadu belt, and sometimes because of a very severe, disturbance in the sea bottom, it must have come, or in some reclamation, it may have come in larger masses and got into the net of the fishermen, etc., etc. It's also possible. Drifting is also possible, and since nobody has extensively surveyed, we don't know the presence of such beds in the Kerala coast. It must be there. Okay, somebody can again look at it. How many Ramsar sites in Kerala? There are only three, according to the official documents, and that is Vembanad Kol, Shastankota, and Ashtamudi. These are the three Ramsar sites in Kerala, and the Environment Department or the Wetland Authority, through the Wetland Authority, is now submitting a lot of applications to consider other wetlands also into this category. It will take time because it's a long process. We have to evaluate the wetlands based on the criteria given by Ramsar Bureau, and then there is a specific application form. Then we have to submit to their website through the Indian Environment Department, and then there is a committee to evaluate that, and then only they will approve the Ramsar. Approve it as a Ramsar site. So it's a long process. So it will take time. Algal culture in blue carbon? No. Blue carbon basically is, I told you, even an algae can sequester carbon. But as an ecosystem, the value is something entirely different. So that's why this is important. Okay. Increasing tourism on the mangrove areas of India, especially in Tamil Nadu and Kerala. Yeah, tourism basically need to be sustainable. Okay, there is something called a responsible tourism, and I am sure that Indians have to change the the whole entire mindset with which we are going into a tourism site, and you will not see a foreign tourist coming to a wetland and even putting a single piece of plastic there. And recently, we have also seen that in some of the wetlands or some of the beaches, coastal areas, the foreign scientists, because it's a nuisance, they are collecting plastic and giving it back to the government. That means our civic sense has to change. Even though we are much more educated, destroying a wetland or when you go to a tourist area, we will not show any kind of responsibility. I have also seen many of the college students coming into a protected area, making all the kind of noises there. So these are all not the things which you need to do. These are all part of the ethical practices we need to do. Tourism can support, because in many of the globally important tourism areas where wetlands are there, tourism is promoted as in a responsible manner, and the money which is gained through tourism is also invested back for restoring the ecosystem, and all these things are possible. So that means there is a possibility of sustainability, but we should have a responsibility while doing tourism also. It's primarily done by the Indians. All these kind of the destruction. For example, you go to some of the mangrove tourism destinations in Kollam, for example. You will see all this even within this site. For example, in Kollam, where there is a new tourism destination in the mangrove area. Within that area, the local vendors are promoted. They sell everything right within the mangrove area. So that is not responsible tourism. And if you really wanted to go as a tourist, you enjoy the beauty, enjoy the aesthetics, understand the values, come back, and then you go for conservation as well. If you have a value, inscribed in your mind, so that's something which we need to change. The extension research, there is a question by Selva. Extension research in the field of restoration and conservation, a lot of possibilities are there, and one of the possibility definitely is how do you actually practice restoration. See, you have an international guidelines for mangrove restoration. I am sure that many of the mangrove models suggested by the people in the West are not applicable in Kerala specifically. So the extension activity should tell the people that this is the actual methodology possible here, based on trial and error, field trial. And then you can, in the restoration activity, you can use a series of plants which are local. For that, we need primary research. For example, how many plants, aquatic plants, can be used for coastal restoration? Sorry, the wetland restoration, including freshwater and brackish water. We need database. Then we will say that we will study only fisheries. That's not possible. See, you have to study the aquatic plants only. You can go for a kind of sustainable conservation practice.
Okay, sir, I think questions are over.
Hari, I have a question.
Hello, Munir.
We cannot hear you.
Hello, sir.
Okay.
Sir, in our state and in riverine and wetland areas, we are performing ranching, fish ranching, and for including exotic species. How it's affecting our wetlands and its biodiversity?
Yeah, that's a good question. That is why I said specifically, purposefully, I included that slide because there is a recent study in the Gangetic belt, how the ranching ultimately reduces the income of the people, fishermen. We have a series of, the fisheries department promote that, and I'm sure that many of the fisheries department, the staff may also promote that. And I am not saying that ranching is bad, but we should have data. Okay, we should have data. For example, if you are introducing some of the exotic species into a wetland, and then you argue that it will provide income for the fishermen, it may be true, but have you got long-term data? I know the example of Malambura Reservoir, for example, because we initially studied there, the biodiversity there, and later also one of my MPhil students studied there. And what I have seen right from the period in which the Indo-German project was launched, and in Malambura, where they introduced tilapia, okay, Oreochromis mozambicus, and it provided, it supported the fishery for a longer period of time. But now what is happening is there is no reintroduction of tilapia there, but they have introduced other carps, and tilapia, because of inbreeding, the size has reduced to almost half. And then now they are not introducing any exotic species, but now the entire fishery is supported by the indigenous species. And the fishermen argue that they are getting more income from the indigenous species than the introduced species. So this is something which we need to understand, but we should have the stronger data to support that. And ranching is maybe good in some of the areas where the natural species or indigenous species are not contributing to the fisheries because of ecological deterioration or things like that. There, some of the introduced species may help. Otherwise, if a system is supporting the natural wetland, it is supporting the local fishermen through the indigenous fishery, then there is no need for the introduction of the exotic species. Where we need to try to introduce indigenous species there. That will actually sustain fishery for a longer period of time. But for all these arguments, what we need is actually data, wetland specific data. Then we can argue. So that means we cannot say that it is good or bad, but depending upon the situation, if you have data, then definitely we can go for that. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Wetlands are having significance in attention in international scale, and last year also we can see that the photograph of the year, a photo of a horseshoe crab migrating for breeding won the first prize in world photographer of the year. Do you think that the countries like India or state like Kerala have adequately prioritized the preservation of wetlands? In your opinion, are the existing policies is sufficient for the protection, or do you believe there is a need of further any enhancements? Because you are one of the members of coastal zone management authorities in Kerala.
Well, see, India has specific rules. You know, we have wetland protection rules, and we have the other rules, including Biodiversity Act, which is partly helpful in protecting the wetlands as well. But where we failed is actually implementing that. See, we have a lot of laws, and even for wetland roles, there are 10-15 laws are directly or indirectly connected with the wetland protection as such or per se. But where we fail is actually in implementing the rules and regulations, and then there is actually no monitoring mechanism. For example, if you look at the Inland Fisheries Act of Kerala, and there is a stronger provision for even protecting any of the wetlands of with a lot of genetic value or germplasm value as a protected sanctuary. But we have freshwater sanctuaries only in paper. Okay, and there is no sanctuary which is full-fledged in Kerala, fish sanctuary, which is only in paper. So that is, and the reason is very simple, because there is no policing mechanism, there is no monitoring mechanism. So what we need in a larger perspective or paradigm for conservation is to have a proper mechanism for monitoring and implementation. And second, see, a wetland protection is connected with the multiple departments. The irrigation department is involved, revenue department is involved, the fisheries department is involved, water resources department is involved. So it's multiple department. The question is who is going to actually go for conservation. A typical example is Veliyakulam Lake in Trivandrum. And the area has declined in the last 30 years by 30%. And number of species, when we were students, when we were documenting the diversity, it was around 40 species. And now it has declined up to 10 or 15 species. And the contribution to fisheries was maximum with the Heteroplus. Now it is only tilapia and the sucker fish there. So all these things are typical examples of deterioration and absence of a single mechanism to oversee the implementation of rules and regulations. And that is a failure as far as India is concerned.
Okay, thank you, sir. Is there any further questions from participants?
So can I one more question?
For sure.
Sir, we can see some conflict in between biodiversity with aquaculture in some point in certain times with ornamental fish export or some exporting activities. There are conflicts are arising always with the biodiversity and conservation aspect as well as with aquaculture in aquaculture or in connection with export. How these conflicts can be managed? Always when biodiversity is discussing aquaculture or aquaculture aspects will be aside or the exporting side will be aside. How these conflicts can be reduced in our perspective?
Well, that's a good question, but I have no yes or no answer for that. Because see, these conflicts are always there. These are the conflicts between conservation and economics. This will continue also. There will not be any end, because see, the policies of the government are all primarily intended to promote trade. Okay, promote trade, and and definitely in through that trade, more economic benefit to the system or the government. And biodiversity conservation is not a priority primarily because directly it is not gaining any economic benefit to the government directly, even though in terms of total value, the conservation may have more optional value. But for the bureaucracy, for the system, trade is very, very important. And that is the reason why even with the blue revolution, if you read any of the new blue growth policies, statements by the governments, not only in India but anywhere in the world, that the promotion is always for increasing trade and not for conservation, not even for sustainable management for that sense. But something is happening, like stock assessment and regulation of overfishing. These are all happening, but biodiversity conservation is sitting at the back seat primarily because it's not directly connected with the economic betterment of the state. That is the argument, but that's only an argument. For example, I'll tell you in the case of ornamental fish. See, you cannot actually send out a biological material for any research purpose, but because Biodiversity Act totally bans that unless and until you have a permission based on certain criteria set in the Biodiversity Act. At the same time, any except the banned one, any ornamental fish you can export from India to anywhere in the world, live, not the dead specimen, live. And all the marine products, which are again not in the CITES list, are exported from India in thousands of tons. There is no regulation. Okay, so that means there is always a conflict between conservation and economic paradigms. So that will continue to be there. I am sure that if the policy of the governments, not only in India, throughout the world, is always promotion of the trade, and there is always a favor in towards the trade promotion or economic benefits. That will always be there. So, but we can put a pressure, those who are loving biodiversity and those who are working and arguing for biodiversity conservation, we can continue to argue for that. That pressure can be maintained, so that some of the direct impacts may get reduced in long period of time. That is the hope that we can have.
Okay, thank you, sir. One Vishnumaya CK raised her hand. Vishnumaya, is there any question? Yes. I think it is as related. Okay, sir. I think most of the queries are cleared, and no more further questions. So now I invite Farsana, the executive member and convener of editorial team association, for deliver vote of thanks.
Thank you. Good evening, all. On behalf of Association of Fisheries graduates, I would like to extend vote of thanks to Professor Biju Kumar for his enlightened session on wetlands, biodiversity, and human well-being. These talks provided us with deep understanding of wetlands and its significance in various forms of life. Bijugumasa's passion and expertise on this session were truly evident and make this talk both informative and engaging. And it's a gratitude to conduct this talk on World Wetlands Day, which helps to shed light on the significance of wetland for preserving biodiversity, mitigating the climate change, as well as providing various essential ecosystem services. The session was an eye-opened event and motivated us to take actions for conserving and protecting these valuable habitats. Furthermore, I would like to extend gratitude to the coordinators of this event for this enlightened session. And lastly, I'll express thanks to all the participants for your active involvements and valuable queries throughout the session. And once again, thank you all. We look forward much more such informative sessions in the future. Thank you and a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Okay. Participant, please fill the feedback form on the link provided to receive the certificate of participation. Thank you. Thank you once again.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable session, and good night all.